There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another Friday Reads, and boy, I'm in a good mood today. I've had an interesting reading week, and life is just kind of chugging along. And I just had a good beauty sleep. You be the judge of the beauty part of that phrase, but a couple times a month I teach a 7 a.m. class on Zoom to some lovely students back in Japan, and I always have breakfast after that, go back to bed for a nap before I do my Friday Reads, which is the case today, and I am just full of stuff and nonsense, vim and vinegar. I have decided to institute a new tradition on my BookTube channel. This is connected to Patreon. I have a Patreon account. I very self-consciously made a statement last week that seemed to resonate with at least two of yous, that I would appreciate more support on Patreon if you were so inclined and able. And so I got two new patrons, and so with their permission, I'm going to tell you who they are, and I'm going to do that going forward. I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but when I get new patrons, I'm going to ask them, is it okay for me to announce your patronage on my Friday Reads? So here we go. I have a new patron from Australia, Leah from New South Wales. She has been on my Bite Size Book Chats a couple times, and she's lovely, and she's supporting me. These two new patrons are both at the Book Buddy level, and so welcome, Leah. Thank you so much. And also the infamous Leo Bancroft, who up until a hot minute ago was a very active booktuber. He has taken a bit of a hiatus. Please come back sometime. And in the meantime, Leo is one of my new patrons, one of my new book buddies. So I'll be sending those lovely people my Sean the Book Maniac Patreon bookmark that I made. It's going out in the mail in the coming days, so thank you very much. I thought that was maybe the least kind of intrusive way to put the existence of my Patreon account in your face. So when I get a new patron, I'll tell you about it, and then we'll move on. So I have some little stories about how Sean the Book Maniac is gradually getting into the groove with maybe Western culture, Canadian culture, doing things, just being a human being in the world, and not only a book maniac. So the first thing is, I got a whole bunch of new shirts, and a lot of them, whatever this material is, I don't know what it is. Is it cotton? I don't know. But anyway, they come out of the washing machine, they drop, when they're dry, they're so wrinkly. I don't believe in using an electric dryer, except for my towels and my house coat, because my house coat I want to wear the same day. But in Japan, I got out of the habit of using an electric dryer, and I have one in my suite, an ensuite washer and dryer, but I don't believe in using it. There's no reason why I need to. So I just hang my shirts wet up to dry, and the kinds that are made of this material, they're just so wrinkly. So Mom said, Sean, I know you don't want to use your dryer, but if you just put them in for 10 minutes and then hang them up, they're going to come out perfect. And look at this shirt. It's in such good shape. You should have seen it before the last time I washed it and hang dried it, because it looked terrible. It was so wrinkly. So I'm going to do that with all my shirts. All my blouses now will get that treatment. And thanks, Mom. I feel like I'm learning something new every day. And there was two more, but I can only think of the one. I've forgotten what the other one was, but yesterday I lost my virginity, my Uber virginity. I had to go over to Mom and Dad's, they're still in Victoria, to get some stuff that, because my little freezer is too small, Mom was storing in her big chest deep freeze for me, a big package of Starbucks coffee from Costco and some frozen chicken breasts, and I just didn't want to carry them home on the bus. It was coming home by the bus. The bus connections were terrible, and I was tired. And so I downloaded the Uber app, booked a ride, and boy, did it go slick, tickety-boo, and wasn't all that expensive. I mean, I think it's still too expensive, $10 for a 5-minute drive. But anyway, if it's going to mean the difference between Sean the Book Maniac getting out of the house occasionally and not only going where there are direct bus routes, because basically that is the university campus, that's about it. Uber will serve me well. Anyway, so yes, Sean is growing up and getting back into the work, getting back into Canadian culture and society and learning how to do things for himself. I have so much news about my reading today, so let's get to that. But first, the week in review. If you like character-driven fiction, have I got a book for you. This is a review of a 2020 novel, The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. This Ooja Cum Spiff. The spiff part I get, but the Ooja Cum Spiff, the whatchamacallit, also known as being neat and fashionable or something. So, yeah, I think P.G. Wodehouse was not particularly interested in the etymology when he slapped that phrase together. Pins and Needles by Betty Jane Hageret. Bert had just flung a shovelful of snow into the air and earned himself a flash of angina when the van pulled up across the street. All right, so my goodness, my stats are crazy. I have 2 bails to tell you about. I have finished 2, and I have started 3. I was only supposed to start 1, but I started 3. Before I tell you what I've bailed on, let me tell you how energized I am by and recommitted I am to the function of bailing in my life. I felt a time pressure because of certain buddy reads or readathons that were starting in March that I absolutely had to finish a bunch of stuff up if I was going to keep on track with that, because I didn't want to just add a whole swack of books to my current reads if I wasn't finishing a whole bunch of stuff too. So that pressure, I've talked about bad kinds of pressure that I put on myself. This is a good kind of pressure because it made me bail. And it made me realize how fundamental bailing is to the richness and the depth of my fabulous reading life. Because life is too short to read books that are kind of dragging and that I'm not really enjoying. And I think I have gotten myself into a bit of, it's not peer pressure, I don't know what it is, but that, oh, this is an important new release, I should finish it. Or that I don't even ask myself, am I really enjoying this? Or any other reason. This is a book that a publisher gave me and I really should finish it. No, that is not my brand. I have recommitted myself to my brand, which is that at the slightest hint of boredom, one badly written sentence on a page, I will bail. Life is too short. I remember, what's the name of that terrible writer, Sri Lankan Canadian writer? He wrote the movie about the man's face and covered in bandages. Oh, you know, Michael Ondaatje. There was such a horrible sentence in one of his novels that I bailed immediately, and boy, that's who I am. So, anyway, I wanted to say that. I'm back. Whatever the problem is in my reading life, bailing is the answer. So the first bail I have to tell you about is this overly hyped piece of, I don't know what, The New Life by Tom Crew. I was so excited about this. I love the cover. The premise sounded really interesting. Everybody else in the world thought it was pretty good or excellent. I thought it was mind-numbingly boring. And there's 2 main characters that are modeled on John Addington Symonds and Havelock Ellis. And even though they're at different stages with accepting their homosexuality in the 1890s, they were both such boring characters, and their characters were so identical, even if their relationships with their wives or whatever and the degree of exploration of their sexuality, even if those things were different, their characters were identical. Their boring intellectual personalities and preoccupations and the ways that they tried to come to terms with their sexuality by all this intellectual mumble jumble. It was just so boring and I could never keep them straight. It's like, now who is Henry again? And is he the one that's actually has children? Like they're identical. So I got, I think, 60%. And I have to say, Tom Crew is a really excellent wordsmith, and he certainly writes about sex well. If there'd been more sex and less of the intellectual bullshit, and if he'd written interesting characters, I have about this much interest in gay intellectual history. And this book went below and beyond the level of my interest, so I just think it was incredibly boring. I gave it my best shot, and it just, I was reading and thinking, oh, this is an important book. Everybody's reading it. I want to join the conversation. Well, I have hereby joined the conversation by saying, this was dull as ditchwater. I have also bailed on this Yemeni novel, 5 Days Untold, by Badr Ahmad, translated from the Arabic by Christian James. There were things about this that I liked, but it was so violent and so misogynistic, and the male characters were, I mean, there was maybe the younger one that was in the army, in the war. Maybe I didn't get to discover that he was a bad person, but the older men, they're just horrible people. And the misogyny, and there's an act of sexual violence that the worst of them perpetrates on his wife, and then it's as if it didn't happen, and then they go on and she makes him breakfast the next day, and we get access to her consciousness about how much she loves him and she'll never leave him. And it's like, I should have bailed at that point, but I kept going with it because there was things about the structure of it and the setting of it, set in the Yemeni civil war, and the background about the banana industry and all that in Yemen that I knew nothing about, and I would like to know more about it, but I could not stay with this book. It wasn't terribly written, it was quite fine, but I mean, who wants to read about crappy men and then the women just think, oh, I'll never leave you? It's like, okay. I didn't have any more time or space for this in my life. However, this was a copy from the publisher, and I have read and enjoyed one book from that publisher and reviewed it. So the promise I make to publishers when they send me review copies is, if I don't like it, I'm going to talk about it on my Friday Reads. I'm not going to do a takedown review separate video. But if I don't like it, I will pass it on to another bookish social media person in hopes that they can give it a good review. And so I found one, and it's going in the mail to him in the next few days. So those are my bails. I'll tell you what I've started next. I have gotten a bare start on Buffalo is the New Buffalo, a short story collection by the Métis writer who lives in what is now, unfortunately, colonially called Canada, Chelsea Vowell. And all I've read is the prefatory material. Heidi and I checked in about it. We're both stoked to read the first story, so I will read it over the weekend. She is such a good writer. The prefatory, the introductions and stuff that she's written here, it's a little bit less accessible than her wonderful Indigenous rights books, which is one of the best introduction to Indigenous issues that I've ever read, and I've read quite a few in the last few years. Because of how important that book is to me, I am a patron of her on Patreon. The introduction and the theoretical backdrop for this collection of kind of futurist, speculative fiction, it makes me look all the more forward to it. Heidi was worried that I would bail because it was going to be too speculative or whatever. I still might, but the way she set up the theory, I thought it was fascinating. I'll leave my comments there, but stoked to start the first story. This is a buddy read with Heidi of my reading life. In the past week, I developed a bit of a craving for more audiobooking in my life. So I have started 2 that I had no intention, because I mean, my reading but this bailing just freed up so much energy of like, I want to try something new, I want to try this, I want to do this. So I'm really happy with the fact that I have started 2 new audiobooks. One is The Trees by Percival Everett, which I think it was finally Heidi's comments on it, her review of it in her weekly reads or whatever, that sold me on it. I've hummed and hawed about whether I wanted to try it, whether it was going to be too violent or whatever, or too satirical, but her spiel sold me. So, and the audiobook is wonderful, and which I borrowed from Libby, from my library through Libby, and I also borrowed the ebook from Libby. I have not figured out a way that I can have the ebook open while I'm listening to the audio. It's the kind of audio narration where it just captivates me. I can't not listen, but I also have the ebook if I've missed a name or if I want to go back and review something that I missed. So I'm it's not the usual audio text combo, but it's kind of a hobbled together version thereof. But the audiobook is wonderful, and if enjoy is the right word, I'm certainly fascinated by the story. I am reading / listening to The Trees, however late I might be to that party. And in particular, I was been missing Clarissa. For those of you long-time viewers and subscribers, you may remember that I have listened to the first 2 volumes of the humongous novel Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. I have done them on audiobook, sometimes referring to the ebook, but mostly just listening to the audio narration. And each of the 3 volumes of this audiobook are 34 hours. So I had 1 volume left, and I can't remember when I finished. Sometime last year I finished volume 2, like before I left Tokyo, I think. So a long time ago. So I've been thinking, Sean, just do that. You know what also prompted me? I watched a video recently, somewhat recently, of Amy's over at Zoe Beck, where she talked about a novel from that same era, I think. Belinda by Maria Edgeworth. And it sounded interesting. I think it was a book haul video, and I left Amy a comment. It had been a long time since I'd been in touch with her, or left a comment, and I left a comment saying, oh, Belinda sounds interesting. And I think I said, we should buddy read it. And she said, yeah, we should. And so I bought it, and it does look fascinating, and it's about 500 pages long. I'm thinking, Sean, you have to finish Clarissa first. Get busy. So I have just yesterday started Volume 3, the final 34 hours of Clarissa, 1768 by Samuel Richardson. And I love listening to it. The language is so rich, and it's such antiquated language, and it's so fascinating on that linguistic level. The story is so incredibly psychologically compelling that even though it had been almost a year since I finished the last volume, I could just sink right back into the story. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. But it's the kind of thing that I can listen. I recently bought headphones that are wireless, and so I can, if I have them on, I can be folding laundry or doing the dishes, because there's, you know, when you're washing dishes and you turn the tap on, it gets too loud and you can't hear with the BookTube video or the audiobook for a few minutes. I hate that, so I've got the headphones on, and I could maybe go out for a walk and listen to Clarissa. So it'll probably still take me most of the rest of the year to get through it, but I'm so glad to be back in it. So that's what I've started. So now let me tell you about what I finished, and I'm really looking forward to talking about these. I finished 2, and they were both really, really good. One just obliterated me. The one that was good but not excellent was the memoir by the incredible Maori writer Patricia Grace. I started it during Skoden 2022, that was in November, and finally finished it. From the Center, A Writer's Life. I gave it 4 stars because I thought up until about the halfway point, and I read it very slowly, but that first half really dragged for me because it, every time I hear a definition of what is the difference between a memoir and an autobiography, I get a new definition from some expert or other. My idea is that a memoir is not the whole sweep of a life, but that a autobiography is, you know, the whole sweep of your life. And I wish this had been a memoir. This read to me like an autobiography. And so the childhood stuff was really, there was certain things about her childhood that were interesting, but that could have been covered in about 5 pages, and the rest of it, from childhood, teenagehood, education, becoming a teacher, getting married, raising a family, a lot of that I thought it was really dull. It wasn't until she started to write, publish, and get involved in politics and Maori rights that the book became so utterly fascinating. And that's just my own subjective opinion. Other people might have enjoyed the first part a lot more than I didn't dislike it. I just thought, oh, I don't really care about, you know, what you learned and, you know, who your favorite teacher was and stuff like that. No, that's not what I'm here for. But oh my goodness, I learned so much about her as a writer and as a political activist. Here is the novella of hers that I read a couple of years ago and absolutely love, Potiki. And she writes a lot about the writing of this book, and that was fascinating. Her vision for the book and the reception of the book and all that, and then did the same for all of her other novels and a couple works of nonfiction. So I loved this. I was riveted by the second half. Could have done without most of the first half, so I gave it 4 stars. I actually started this one, if you'll remember, back in November of last year, reading it on Voxer to Kendra. and I stopped almost immediately because there were so many Maori words that I didn't know how to pronounce, and I didn't want to, it felt really disrespectful to just plow through them and do my best. But to do the research, like when I'm learning a new pronunciation, I forget it almost immediately. So every time I would encounter it, if I learned how to pronounce it on page 3, when it showed up on page 5, I would have to go back and look it up again. And it was just going to take forever to do that. So I didn't read it out loud to Kendra, but I read it myself. And I'm really glad I did. And I'm itching to get to more of her fiction. Patricia Grace. She is, if I read one more book by her that I love, she's going to be on my pantheon, because Potiki is it's certainly one of the very best novellas I've read. It's one of the very best works of Indigenous literature that I've read. And, oh, I'm all the more fascinated to keep going now that I've read her memoir or her autobiography. The next one I have to tell you about is my book of the year so far. This work of fiction bowled me over, and that is the novella by a white guy. What the hell? William Maxwell. They Came Like Swallows. Oh my God, I read this to one of my patrons, just finished it late last night, and it was so emotionally devastating, not just the ending, but especially the ending, that I could barely read it out loud. I haven't heard from her. I hope that my having to take long pauses so that I wouldn't start crying, you know, while the recorder's still playing, wasn't disruptive, because I was just so deeply moved by this. The writing was just incredible. So it's about this middle-class family in Illinois at the end of World War I, at the beginning of the flu epidemic. And the flu epidemic is central to what happens in the story. I'm not going to say anything more about it, but the way that William Maxwell writes the two children's point of view, one is, he's 6 or 7, and then his older brother is maybe 9 or 10. I don't know. I don't know how old anybody is, but they're young kids, and both of they weren't first person, but they were third person limited. The first section was the youngest boy, the second section was the older boy, and the third section was the father. And the mother we see the mother through the eyes of the 3 characters and various family members and so on. But it just captures the world of childhood, goes so deep into how grief can splinter a family apart or not. I think I'm going to try to review it, but maybe I'm not sure I can review it, do a full review. I think this might be one of those books that the highest compliment, the best way that I can recommend it is to just confess to you that it's so powerful, it's so beautiful, it's such an incredible work of fiction that it's left me mute. And if you're the kind of viewer, subscriber who goes by, oh, Sean's mute about this book, I better check it out, put this one on that list. A 1937 novel that, I mean, so there's lots of resonance from COVID, right? But a novella from so far back that has such an emotional potency to it in the year 2023, almost, 90 years later. Holy smokes. William Maxwell. It's the first thing I've read by him. I want to read absolutely everything else. All right, so I finished 2, bailed on 2. I actually had written a note to myself to say, self, if you finish 5 books, you can start 6 next week. Well, I finished 4, and I'm going to still start 6. 2 month-long readathons are now in full swing, I'm assuming. One is the Irish Readathon, although I didn't see any announcement videos. Did I miss them? I must have missed them. So anyway, doesn't matter. I'm going to be reading Irish literature in March, and also Welsh literature. Dewithon is definitely going. Heather of Soggy Expat Book Nerd has put a couple videos up already about Dewithon. I'm not going to go crazy with either one the way I usually have in years past, because I just don't want to get clogged up with current reads. But I'm going to start 2 for the Irish Readathon this week and 1 for the Welsh. So let's talk about those first. A book that Ronan Hession talked about so passionately on the last week's chat that I put up, and I've had, I think, somebody on for a bite-sized book chat, haven't I, about this book as well? Yes, Maria of MH Books. Anybody I know who's read it worships it. Sonia of An Enthusiastic Reader and I are buddy reading it, starting in the coming week. I am not much of a poetry reader, but one Irish poet that I have read one complete, very small, but one complete book of poems is the Irish poet Evan Boland. I read this selected poems a few years ago and absolutely loved it. Because of how much I loved it, I acquired this collection of, let's see, what is it? Autobiographical essays by her. A Journey with Two Maps, Becoming a Woman Poet. Now, if I don't get on with it, because it's essays about poetry and I'm not that into poetry, but I sure loved her little book of poetry, but if I don't get on with it, this first section is called Journeys, and those look to be like they are autobiographical essays, including essays about her own poetic life journey. And then Maps is about other poets, Adrienne Rich, Elizabeth Bishop. And then Destinations. The last essay is Letter to a Young Woman Poet. Oh, it sounds really interesting. Yes, I hope to stick with it. I'm starting out slow with Debuthon, but I am going to start this Welsh novella, The Small Mind by Menna Gali. And this is published in 1962. And this is going to be a pseudo-buddy read with Kieran of Katie Books. A young collier dies in South Wales. I don't know if it's a mining accident or whatever. Collier's mining, right? I think so. But anyway, it must be the small mine. So he dies in the coal mine, I think. And the story goes from there. And two, just because books. I have to keep a steady supply of just because books into my reading diet to keep myself happy. And that's why I'm not going so crazy with readathons as I usually have in the past. The first one is really interesting. I often refer to that podcast that's no longer with us, The Readers, which was co-hosted by Simon Savage, who's still a going concern on BookTube, and Thomas, who is not on BookTube. But when they co-hosted that show, it was my favorite book podcast. I gobbled up all the old episodes, and I don't want to exaggerate and say that I got to know Thomas personally, but we had a little bit of personal contact, DMing and stuff about books and this and that. He saw the tweet that Goodreads spits out when I finish a book and give a rating, and it says 5 stars to, and the book was A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. That was just, a few weeks ago. And he said, yeah, such a good book, isn't it? And I said, yeah, you're the one that put it on my radar, and I've just read it for the 3rd time. Thank you so much. And he went, we're Goodreads friends, and this little conversation was happening through tweets on Twitter, so it's available for the reading public to enjoy. You can go look it up if you want. And he went on to my Goodreads, and maybe he had remembered this, or maybe he just found it, but I have a catalog of books that I first found out about from the Readers podcast. And so he was looking through that, and he said, how about I give you a short list of books that I think you should read from that list? I said, okay, and he gave me a list of, I think, 4 or 5 titles. So, all of that is to say, that is why I am starting this novel from the library. And it doesn't tell you much, does it? It is a Mary McCarthy novel, Birds of America. And it's one that Thomas raved about on one of those episodes years ago, and I had it on my TBR because of that, and now I'm going to finally read it. I love Mary McCarthy. I've read The Group, and I've read that short little intellectual memoirs just a few months back. Now this will be my 3rd by her, and I hope that I like it so that I will stay in Thomas's good books. Oh, did I say that I'm starting 2 just because books? No, I'm starting 3. Anyway, so the second of the 3 just because books is for a pseudo-buddy read with the wonderful Bernard Lombardi over on Instagram, who has like 8 million followers and he has such a, I've never seen another bookstagrammer who has such a personal, friendly connection with his followers. Like he's created something really quite magical there, and you really need to check him out. And he and I are going to read this book and hook up on Zoom, not having done any kind of buddy reading Voxer check-ins, just talking about it. That's what a pseudo-buddy read is. This novel, I think it's from Spain. Old Lady Voice by Elisa Victoria. Translated from the Spanish by Charlotte Whittle. The protagonist is a girl. I think she's a child. I don't know how old she is, but her mother's in hospital with a grave illness, and she's staying at her grandmother's, and that's all I need to know about it. But I think it's quite a dark story. And Old Lady Voice is an intriguing title. And look at that cover. And this is from And Other Stories. And Other Stories put out the best, I just love the physical books they put out. Like this, so heavy. And just the way it feels in your hand, and it's hard to open. And when I'm finished reading this book, it will be as hard to open as it is now, because I will read the whole thing like this to keep that really strong spine intact. That's just the way I am. We're planning to have our Zoom chat in the 3rd week of March. And the final Just Because book is a book that I got from the publisher. The publisher is Vehicle Press. They sent me 2 books by this gay Canadian novelist. I'd never heard of him. His name is Christopher Dorado, and this is his debut novel. I believe it's his debut novel, The Geography of Pluto. The protagonist is a high school geography teacher in Montreal, struggling to make connections. And that's all I know about it. I hope I like it. If I don't like it, then I will tell you that I don't like it and pass the book on to somebody else. But I hope I do. All right. Well, I am just stimulated up to my unwrinkled collar. I hope your reading is similarly stimulating. Thanks for watching.